How many of you have ever seen the movie, It's a Wonderful Life, a Christmas movie? Y'all remember young George Bailey? And every time he would come into the drugstore where he worked, he would always hit this, I think it was a lighter or something, he would hit it and make a wish. You remember what the wish was? He would always say, I wish I had $1 million. You remember that? Let me ask you something. If you won $1 million, if that wish was granted to you, what would you do with it? Don't answer out loud, just think about it. What would you do if someone granted you that wish or you managed to win $1 million? Just free money, extra money. We could probably come up with some pretty good ideas of what to do with that money, couldn't we? I mean, I just think of so many things I'd like to have and do and that kind of thing. Well, in today's story, we're going to learn about a man who hit the jackpot. I mean, he had to decide what to do with all this extra money that he had. It sounds kind of like a problem that we could live with, right? I mean, I could if I had that problem, it wouldn't stress me too much. I think I could handle that. Let me give you a little background, though, before we deal with this man. In Luke chapter 12, and that's where we're going to be if you care to look, but the scripture is going to be mostly on the board, on the screen. But in Luke chapter 12, Jesus is teaching people as he normally did, and he was teaching about some deep spiritual truths. And I kind of imagine as he's teaching, thinking that man, I'm really nailing this lesson. The people are getting this. And I kind of feel that way sometimes. I feel like, I can look out and tell if people are actually getting what we're talking about, or I can tell if they're like, huh, what's he saying? And as he's teaching these things, there was someone that came up to him and said, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." So much for the people getting the deep spiritual truths, right? And so obviously this man had some grievance he wanted to settle with his brother. Perhaps he was expecting this inheritance, and maybe when the time came, the will was read or whatever, and it turned out that his brother gets it all. And he didn't think that was fair. Maybe he had already counted on what he was going to do with that extra money. And so he thought, well, if I go and get Jesus on my side, if I get him to be on my side, then perhaps my brother will be able to split this inheritance with me and give me this money. And so this is what Jesus told him. He said, "Man, who appointed me a judge or arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, listen to this. He said, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Ouch. I mean, that wasn't what this guy was looking for. He wanted more possessions. And Jesus didn't say, yeah, what you're asking is fair. I think I'll intervene here and try to get... No, he said, what are you doing? What are you doing? He said, first of all, I'm not a judge between you in this matter. And he said, be on guard against all this greed. Life does not consist of the abundance of possessions. I mean, again, it seemed like a reasonable question, a reasonable request to come to Jesus to settle this dispute, this argument between the brothers. But instead of solving the problem, Jesus went right to the heart of the matter. And he warned the brother about greed. And he told him that your life is not about what you own. We're going to talk about some things this morning that are hard for us to get in this country, in this society. Because in this society, money is everything. You hear people say money is power. I was watching a movie the other day that had a guy on it. He was a drug dealer, and he had all this cocaine and stuff. And he said, this represents power. And that's kind of what what it is to people today. Money is power. But Jesus says, you're getting this all wrong. So Jesus wanted to illustrate this story. And so in Luke chapter 12, beginning in verse 16, Jesus began to tell this story. He said, there was once a rich man who had a great harvest. And he thought to himself, what am I going to do? I have no place to store all these crops. I mean, it was a harvest like he wasn't expecting. He says, now what do? I have no place to put all this stuff. I know what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns. I'll build bigger barns, and I'll store all my stuff. And then I'll be able to say to myself, take it easy. Eat, drink, have fun. That's the story. Now I've got a little test for you. Let me ask you some questions. And you can answer out loud. They're simple yes or no questions, okay? The first question is this. With that story in mind, was there anything wrong with the farmer having a good harvest? No. Was there anything wrong with him building bigger barns? No. Not really. Was there anything wrong with him storing things? No. So was there anything wrong with what this guy was doing? I mean, I need to understand this because I would do the same thing, perhaps. And yet the answer to the last question is yes, there was something wrong, and we wouldn't know that just from what he was doing, except that according to Jesus, listen to this. According to Jesus, he said in verse 20 and 21, but God said to him, you fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you've worked for? Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. Now, I want us to spend some time thinking about this. I want us to think about and try to figure out what was wrong with what this guy was doing. Because we already answered some questions and we said, no, there's nothing wrong with this. No, there's nothing wrong with this. No, there's nothing wrong with this. And yet Jesus said, there's something major wrong with this. And in my little mind, especially in this nation that we live in, the society that we live in, that is so driven by money and power and those types of things, primarily money, and I need to know what he means by this. Because this seems like something I might do. I mean, we get some money, we invest it, we want to get to where we can live off of those investments so that we can eat, drink, and have a good time, right? It's the American way, you know. But Jesus called him a fool. And we know that having money, just that by itself is not sinful. I mean, there's many rich people who have been faithful to God. I mean, I can think of some: Job, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David. These were all rich people, and yet they were faithful to God. And so, what is wrong here? I want us to figure this out. Because in the world we live in the time, the culture we live in, this can be a problem. And I say that it's always been a problem, hasn't it? Every culture, every time, every society has pretty much been like this. Let's see if we can figure it out this morning. What's wrong with the rich man's attitude? First problem is the man was not thinking about the source of his blessings. All he was thinking about is the stuff. He wasn't thinking about the source. He failed to realize that the blessings came from God. He didn't say anything about that. Didn't indicate this. The man's thoughts seemed to only be on himself. He said to himself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take it easy. Eat, drink, have a good time. Isn't that the American way? This wasn't an American, by the way. But isn't that what it's all about today? You know? As long as I have enough stuff to have a good time. In other words, it was all about him and God. And what God wanted of him was not even on his radar. He gave no thought to God. No thought to where the gifts came from or this extra harvest came from. It's like, man, look at this. It was, what can I do for me to be happy? It was all about him. Let me share an interesting prayer with you. I know you've probably heard this before. But in Proverbs chapter 3, listen to this. This is very interesting to me. The prayer is this. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. This is not the prayer that I was thinking I was about to read. But he says, honor the Lord with what? With your wealth. If you have wealth, honor the Lord with it. How? With the first fruits of your crops. If you put God first, then your barns will always be overflowing. Was this man honoring God with his new riches? No. There was not even a thought of God in this story. He was thinking of himself. I mean, what about that $1 million that we talked about a few minutes ago? What about that $1 million? If you won that $1 million, would you honor the Lord with some of that? Or would we be too busy thinking, how can I invest this? What can I do with this? What kind of stuff can I buy? Man, I could buy a really fancy house with this and cars and on and on. Or would we help the needy? Support some missionaries? Give to a local church? Or would we only think about ourselves and how much fun we could have like this man seemed to be doing? Are we honoring the Lord? Listen to this. I doubt any of us have won $1 million or probably ever will. But here's the question. Are we honoring the Lord with what we have now? This is a little closer to home. This is a more realistic idea than this mythical $1 million that nobody ever wins. Are we honoring the Lord with what we have now? This man greedily, is that a word? Harvested his abundance without recognizing God as the ultimate source of all of his blessings and of everything that he had. He was more concerned about where he was going to put all this stuff. Not once did it talk about him thanking God for blessing him. Not once did he talk about, I'm going to give some of this to the Lord. Not once did he even mention God at all. Second problem. This man was trusting in his money instead of in God. And that's too easy to do. I mean, money is one of the places where we most struggle with our faith. I mean, we're not sure we can trust God enough to take care of our needs, even though He created us, even though He knows what our needs are, and He promised that He would take care of us. Even though we've read that and we understand that, we don't really trust God as much as we trust the things that we have. The prayer that I was mentioning a few minutes ago that I thought I was about to read is a different Proverbs. Instead of Proverbs 3, it's Proverbs 30. Listen to this. It says, give me neither poverty nor riches. This is Proverbs 30, beginning in verse 8. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal, and so dishonor the name of my God. Isn't that an interesting prayer? Lord, I don't want to have too little to where I have nothing, but I don't want to have too much to where I might think that I did it on my own and dishonor you. Give me just enough. Give me just what I need. That would be a hard prayer today for us to pray, wouldn't it? I mean, we trust our money. We trust our the things that we have. We trust our 401ks, our possessions. This rich fool, I hate to call him that, but that's what Jesus called him. This rich fool, he was one of God's people. I'm sure he probably went to the church of the day. Not really church, but the synagogue. I mean, he would go to worship and things like that, as any good Jew would do. I would assume that he would do that. But he didn't seem to trust God. Why? Why didn't he trust God? Let me explain why. You see this? I can take this and I can see it. I can feel it. I know what this can do. I know what it can purchase for me. I know what it can bring me. I can trust this because it's in my hand, right? I can see it. I can count it. I can count up what's in my savings account or what's in my checking account or some other account or a 401k or something like that. I can see it. I can count on it. I can touch it. It's easier to trust what you can see, isn't it? And that's what happens to too many churchgoers is they can't really see God. Oh yeah, we read about Him, we talk about Him, but we can't really see God. And so they don't really believe that God will be there for them. It's hard to trust that which you cannot see. So they end up putting their faith in things that they can see, that they can touch, that they have. Now, how many of you would like a bill like this with a big old 1 in the front of it? You're welcome to come get it if you want it. Anybody? No takers? Okay. I offered. It was a serious offer. If you don't want it, I'll put it back in my pocket. It's not the response I expected to get. I want you to listen. Now that I know that you're not too materialistic that you want to jump up and take this money, I want you to listen to what Jesus says to you. I want you to listen to this very carefully. In Luke chapter 12, I didn't know that was up there. In Luke chapter 12, beginning in verse 22, Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and your body more than clothes." In verse 29, he goes on to say, "And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it. For the pagan world runs after such things. And your Father knows that you need them. But seek His kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well." That is a hard lesson for us to get. A very hard lesson. Oh, we can sit here and understand it. And we can say, yeah, it makes sense. But it's much harder to do, isn't it? In reality. When we get out into the world and we face problems and we need food and we need clothing and the different things in life, and we trust our money because that's what we have, and don't trust God. The last problem that Jesus tells us about in this parable is that this man did not have a rich relationship with God. He said that in verse 21. So what does this mean? What does it mean to have a rich relationship with God? See, like many of us, this man didn't seem to be involved in, a lot of sinful activities. It never said that he was a big sinner or involved in sexual immorality or any kind of immoral activities or anything like that. He just wasn't rich toward God. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, verse 19, "Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal." I want you to look at this man's priorities. Look at the priorities. Was he rich toward God? Jesus said no. Was he laying up heavenly treasures? No, he was laying up earthly treasures. That was his only concern. How am I going to store all this cool stuff that I just got? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? Man, I'm going to be set for life. He said to himself, eat, drink, have a good time, have fun. That's it. Isn't that the priority of most of the world today? I mean, isn't it? To make sure we got good food and good and drink and good homes, and that we can just kind of sit back and prop up our feet on our lazy boy and sit in front of the TV and watch Alabama or Auburn play football or what, and just have a good time, right? Just take our ease. And we work so hard throughout our lives to get to that point just so we can have fun. Most people just want to relax and enjoy the good life. But what Jesus is telling us is that we need to enjoy the God life. Okay? So how can we be rich toward God and enjoy the God life? How can we do that? We're rich toward God when we when we do the opposite of what this story tells us about this rich man. If we do the opposite, if Jesus tells us a story about this guy and says he's not doing right, but we want to do right, then what do? We do opposite of what he did, right? Makes sense. We're rich toward God when we help finance the spreading of the gospel. This rich fool planned to invest his money only on himself. He had no spiritual plans for his money whatsoever. None whatever. It was all about him. We're rich toward God when we invest our time and our energy on helping others. This guy in the story, he just wanted to invest his money on himself and retire and have plenty of good life. Spend his life eating and drinking and having a good time, rather than trying to grow his personal relationship with God. That wasn't even on his radar. He wasn't thinking about that. We're rich toward God when we use the earthly riches that we are blessed with, not that we are so good that we went out and got, but that God blessed us with, to show how much value we have in God, how much we value God. God wasn't included in this man's plans at all. That's why Jesus said what he did. There was nothing wrong physically with what he was doing. There was nothing wrong with having extra crops. There was nothing wrong with trying to figure out a place to store them. There was nothing wrong with planning ahead. What was wrong was he had no thought of God whatsoever in his life. And what Jesus is saying is that God said, look, your life is going to be required of you, and then who's going to get all this stuff you've been working for? What good did it do you? What good does it do us to spend our entire life working and saving and trying to get as much stuff as we can gather together and collect and have? What good is all that when we die? Who's going to get that stuff? You ain't taking it with you. It's not going to do you any good. What good is it? It's just junk that clutters up our lives. Jesus is saying, you got to get your priorities straight. He's not saying don't have stuff. He's saying you got to seek God first and His kingdom first. And if He blesses you with some stuff, fine. Still, your first number one priority has got to be God. It has to be. You remember at the beginning of the story, what kind of prompted all this was when these men were arguing over money, over the inheritance and everything. You remember what he said? Beware, guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own. Let me say that again, because this is hard for us to get. It's hard for me to get. Life is not measured by how much we own. What you have is not a reflection of who you are. The reality is the richest people on earth are those who are rich toward God. We've got to get that. We've got to get that. I hope you're paying attention because I have another test for you. Okay? It's a short one. Will our earthly treasures last forever, yes or no? No. How long will our heavenly treasures last? Forever. How long is forever? It's forever. Right? It don't stop. It don't end. There's an end to all this other stuff that we have. This bill that I had a minute ago, I won't have it forever. If someone had stepped up a minute ago, I probably wouldn't have it now. It's weird. I have to study on that one. But it wouldn't have mattered to me because it's going to get gone. Somebody's going to get it. I'm not going to keep it. What do I care? You know? Most people, like this rich man in this story, this rich fool that Jesus calls him, focus on the things that don't last. You know, houses and cars and boats and motorcycles. You know, stuff. None of these things are going to last. Every bit of it. Everything you own, down to the shoes you're wearing today, they're going to be gone. Everybody's looking at their shoes now. What's wrong with my shoes? Well, they're going to be gone one day. You know? We all struggle with wanting more and more stuff. We want to have stuff in our life. I hear some people call that stuffitis. It's a disease. You know? I mean, do we have a lot of stuff? Yeah, especially compared to a lot of people. We're just covered up with too much stuff. I mean, we got so much stuff. We got our house full of stuff. If we've got a garage or a barn, we put it in there. If those get full, what do? Do you know why the business of storage buildings is so huge? I mean, you can go down into almost any town and see them putting up new storage rental buildings. Or go down to a corner store and see them selling storage buildings that they'll bring and put it in your yard. Why? So that you'll have a place to put all your junk stuff. And we put it in the storage buildings and we'll never even see it again, probably. But we know we've got it. Just knowing it's there makes us feel good. We keep putting more and more and more stuff in our lives, and then it breaks, or it gets lost, or it wears out, it rots, it rusts. I mean, that's how we have to look at all this precious stuff that we own. It's going to be gone one day. And at the very least, God's going to require our lives one day, and we're not going to have it anyway. So what good is it? Why do we spend so much time collecting it? Why do we think it's so important? I'm going to give you a second to think about that question because I want that one to sink in. Why do we think all this stuff is so important? But spiritual treasures? Oh man, that's where it's at. Spiritual treasures. Because they'll last how long? Forever. Forever. You are listening. They'll last forever. Don't let money be your God. Don't let money be your God. Let God be God. He's pretty good at it. Let Him do it. Let God be God. Enjoy the God life. Be rich toward Him by putting time and energy to grow your relationship with Him. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's okay to have some stuff. Enjoy what you have, but recognize where it came from and put things in their proper place. Don't put them way on top of your priority list. Thank God for what you have. Give Him your first fruits of what you have and trust Him to supply those things you need. Money makes a bad God. I'm going to choose the real God. That's what He does best, is He be's God. That's what He does. Let Him be yours. Trust Him. Trust Him. Recognize that He gives you what you have. He gives you the ability to earn. I want everybody right now to take a deep breath and let it out right now. Do you know why you were able to do that? Because God let you. God allowed you to breathe that air. He allowed you to take that breath. You wouldn't have done it without Him. We're nothing without Him. Make Him your number one priority. Let Him be your God. If you need to come to the Lord this morning to make any correction in your life, we want to give you that opportunity right now while we stand and sing.